Racists and wizards and elves, oh my! This is the one in which we discuss the right wing's collective meltdown over the new Lord of the Rings TV show, and why you probably shouldn't care about seeing a person of color in Middle-earth. So please hit that like and subscribe, and enjoy the show. Alright folks, it's September 2022, and regrettably there are still a lot of people in the United States who flinch at the sight and or sound of a black character on TV. The catalyst for this latest right-wing culture war mass hysteria is a TV show called The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, which debuted on Amazon Prime on September 1st. The specific trigger is the character Arondir, a dark-skinned elf played by a POC actor, Ismael Cruz Cordova. And bit of a trigger warning for you hypersensitive conservatives out there. Cordova is one of a handful of POC actors who will be playing characters in this show. Now, before we jump into the cesspool of bigotry and selective outrage, here's some context about the show. Back in 2017, Amazon purchased the television rights to the Lord of the Rings IP for $250 million. Consequently, Amazon made a $1 billion production commitment to 5 seasons of a TV show based on the Lord of the Rings, making it currently the most expensive TV show ever produced. And to clear up any possible confusion for those of you who haven't been following the development of the show or haven't watched any of the episodes yet, though The Rings of Power has quite a bit of mythological and visual continuity, it is not, strictly speaking, an adaptation of the Lord of the Rings book trilogy, nor is it a continuation or prequel of Peter Jackson's films. It was, however, developed in consultation with the Tolkien estate, specifically J.R.R.'s grandson, Simon. As the title suggests, the premise of the show is ultimately about the forging of the mythic rings of power thanks to the schemes of the Dark Lord Sauron in Middle-earth's Second Age. Which is a lot of geek speak to say that this show is set thousands of years before the movies you certainly watched and the books you've lied about reading. So with all that out of the way, just what the hell is the controversy? Well, as best I can tell, it is literally about the relative dermal pigmentation of a particular actor. So going back to the beginning, the major elvish characters introduced in the Lord of the Rings books by Tolkien were written in such a way as to strongly indicate that they're probably white. And given that the Lord of the Rings books were published in the 50s and that Tolkien himself was a tea-sipping English geek and a tweed-wearing Oxford professor, that makes sense. So, jump forward to the mid and late 90s, and Peter Jackson in New Zealand is working on a massive, sweeping 3-film adaptation of the 3 Lord of the Rings books. These movies are whiter than a post-church lunch at an Alabama Cracker Barrel. And the same thing basically happened 10 years later when Jackson went to direct a trilogy based on The Hobbit. So now, we're 10 years past that, and to quote Saruman in Jackson's adaptation of The Two Towers, "The world is changing." And what I mean by that, specifically in regards to the Rings of Power, are 2 facts. Fact 1. Compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 70 years ago, diversity and inclusion are much higher priorities for Hollywood and pop culture. And that's okay. Fact 2. The particular elf character in question, Arondir, the one at the center of this cultural shitstorm, that's an original character. The character doesn't exist in Tolkien's books. The very books that this show is only loosely based on. The books whose central storylines are about Bilbo acquiring the ring and Frodo destroying it take place thousands of years after this show. So right-wingers, what the hell is the problem? Well, Tolkien described or implied elves like Legolas, Arwen, Galadriel, and Elrond are all white. Well, that's true, but as I said, Arondir isn't in Tolkien's books. Did Tolkien write anywhere that elves can't have dark skin? Well, in the Silmarillion, Tolkien wrote that elves would be the fairest of all earthly creatures. Fairest is an adjective with multiple definitions and multiple interpretations, one of which is, yes, light-skinned, but others include physically attractive, visually appealing, pure. And I hate to tell you, those definitions are not the exclusive province of white people. People of color also qualify. Well, Tolkien imagined that The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all those books would be a primordial history of real-world Europe. Admittedly, only as far as we know, there weren't dragons in ancient Europe, or elves of any color, or dwarves, or orcs, or hobbits, or wizards, let alone wizards who are actually angels, or guardian spirit eagles, or 9 wraiths, or an army of the dead, or whatever the hell Tom Bombadil was, or giant flaming eyes fixed upon black towers, which are the disembodied spirits of a dark lord, or evil sentient jewelry. My point being, even if you accept Tolkien's conceit that everything he wrote about Middle-earth was actually an interpretation of the pre-recorded history of real-world Europe, it's not. It's fiction. It's fantasy. Virtually without exception, every major element of Tolkien's Middle-earth writing is ahistorical, unrealistic, and anti-scientific. Furthermore, Peter Jackson and Tolkien himself took many creative liberties in order to tell us these stories. Consider the very fact that the primary language that these characters communicate in, especially on screen, is English. Set aside the entirely fictional languages like Elfish, Dwarfish, and the Black Speech of Mordor. Even if we accept that ancient pre-recorded history real-world conceit, the primary language that these characters use to communicate to the reader or watcher on page or on screen is a type of English that wouldn't be invented for literally thousands of years later. So, like the movies? Ha ha ha! Nice try, libtard. You thought you got me. I ain't talking about the Hobbit movies. They suck. Oh, so just the original Lord of the Rings movies that came out in 2001, 2002, 2003. Bingo! Well, turns out they really weren't that faithful to the source material either. In case you don't believe me, I recommend that you scroll through the Tolkien vs. Jackson page on the one wiki to rule them all, which describes in vivid and beautiful detail the many discrepancies between Peter Jackson's films and Tolkien's original books. And yet, despite that fact, that first trilogy of films by Peter Jackson won a gazillion Academy Awards, is critically acclaimed even to this day, and is beloved probably by most of the nerds who are now complaining about Rings of Power. I wonder what's different. So in conclusion, at least as far as I'm concerned, the reasons offered by people critical of the creation, character, and casting of Arondir are insubstantial. They don't withstand scrutiny. They're weak, fragile, and they collapse as totally and utterly as the Dark Tower of Barad-dûr when Frodo destroys Sauron by casting the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. How was that for a simile? And finally, I'll even say this as a reminder, though I think it's completely unnecessary. No one is under any obligation to watch or like The Rings of Power. You are not a bigot if you are genuinely uninterested in this show. You are not a bigot if you give this show a shot and you don't like it. Hell, you aren't even a bigot if it turns out that you simply don't like or are uninterested in Arondir. No one is obligated to watch shows or like characters regardless of their skin color. But if the, or one of the, reasons that you don't like this completely original character in a high fantasy setting with elves, dwarves, orcs, wizards, guardian angels, talking trees, giant spiders, fiery eyes, armies of the dead, and sentient evil bling, you might be a bigot. And you should probably try not to be. Hey you! Yeah, you! Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, and I hope that you did, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe. Also, my link tree is in the description below, so if you have a sec, go ahead and share the love on all my social media accounts. Also, if you want to express an opinion, eternal devotion, or undying contempt, go ahead and leave a comment because we're always looking for feedback. And on that note, I look forward to pondering politics and pop culture again with you very soon.